Om Tava Kathamritam Tattva Jeevanam Kavibhedidam Kalmashakha Savaramangalam Srimatavadam Bhuvidrananti Bhuridajana. So we are continuing the discussion. These are some of the statements from the Gospel which are collected in this well-known book, Sayings of Sri Ramakrishna. These are all selections from the Gospel. This page, these are collections from the Gospel, but the title of the book is Sayings of Sri Ramakrishna, a separate collection of selections from the Gospel. Here, Sri Ramakrishna makes a very interesting statement about the importance of training the mind in spiritual life. The mind is everything. If the mind loses its liberty, you lose your liberty. If the mind is free, you too are free. The mind may get dipped in any color like a white cloth fresh from the wash house. So the importance of mind and keeping the mind in contact with spiritual ideas, these are the topics. Again, we will turn to some of the important parables which illustrate this point. There is a well-known illustration in the Chandogya Upanishad, in the 6th chapter, which contains the well-known exposition of the grand statement, the great statement, Mahavakya, in Tattvam Asi, you may have heard of. Thou art dash. The great teacher, Uddalaka, that's the name of the Rishi, teaches the disciple, and in fact the disciple is his own son, Swetaketu, the great truth. And what is the truth? The truth is this: the absolute reality which is immanent in all beings, which is omnipresent and all-pervading, the transcendental reality is not distinct or different from yourself. As the immanent principle, it resides in all of us, including you. As the omnipresent reality, it is all-pervading. It is the origin, it is the sustaining principle behind, and also it is the point of dissolution of the whole creation. So God is not somebody or something that sits outside, but sits within. This instruction is repeated 9 times, one after another, from the 8th Brahmana of the 6th chapter till 16th Brahmana. From 8th section to 16th section of the 6th chapter of the Chandogya Upanishad contains these 9 repetitions. And each repetition is substantiated, expounded with the help of an imagery and an illustration. The student repeats the question, please explain once more. And in response to this request, the father and the teacher, that is Uddalaka is the name of the saint, repeats this instruction, and with each instruction he gives one illustration. One of the most important illustration is this. Sometimes it's called in Sanskrit Vedhaksha Purusha Drishtanta, means the illustration of a person who was blindfolded and taken as a prisoner. He was ambushed, waylaid, and taken as a prisoner by 3 robbers who tied him to a tree. That's the story. Sri Ramakrishna gives this illustration with a little deviation. But I shall first quote this illustration in the Upanishad, then come to Sri Ramakrishna's own illustration. Both are practically, both have got one central message. Now, in the Upanishad illustration, a person, a a traveler, a wanderer, returning towards Gandhara. Gandhara is his homeland, today's Kabul, the capital of Afghanistan, as it is known today. In those days, it was known as Gandhara Desha, the land of Gandharas. So this man was returning to Gandhara Desha, maybe from the Indo-Gangetic plain. And as he was walking through a deserted road in a thick jungle, some robbers came to him. They waylaid, they ambushed, and they took him a prisoner. They wanted to take everything from him. But before that, they did something. They blindfolded him, so he couldn't see where he was being led, and tied him to a tree. And they left. And this man began to cry and weep. I belong to Gandhara Desha, I belong to this particular place. I was unfortunately ambushed, robbed, and taken prisoner and tied to a tree. Please save me. He began to shout. Many people listened, many people didn't bother. But one kind-hearted traveler who was passing through the same road heard this cry from the bush, and he approached him and he untied the chain, the rope, and then removed his blindfold. Then he told this good man, well, I want to go to the land of Gandharas. That's my homeland. So he didn't know which way to turn. It was a deserted forest, and he was taken blindfolded. So he had lost his track. So how can I return to my homeland? This is important. To the place where I belong to. That point should be remembered. How can I go back to the place where I belong to? All spiritual practices is a spiritual journey, a homebound journey. We have left our homeland. Our true nature is Atman, Brahman. We are the knowledge absolute, the consciousness absolute, the bliss absolute. But then we are now blindfolded. Our inner eyes are bound. We cannot see our own true nature. And we are taken far away from our track. So we identify ourselves with this body. We belong to an empire. But we mistake ourselves to be a beggar. Sometimes, a billionaire's son suddenly starts thinking that he's a homeless fellow lying somewhere across the Berkeley University. How to imagine? He actually is a billionaire. He has lots of money in the bank. But he suddenly forgets his true identity. And he considers himself to be a beggar, a penniless beggar. For all practical purposes, he becomes miserable. He loses his true identity. And then he superimposes upon himself the wrong notion that he is not a billionaire, but he is a beggar. And then he identifies himself with the empty place where he takes shelter every day evening, maybe taking the help of some charity. This is what every human being is doing. Actually, he is a billionaire. He has an immense spiritual wealth. He is not this psychophysical mechanism. Which is a limited entity. We are the all-pervading, immanent reality. That's the teaching of Vedanta. Swamiji stresses this idea on innumerable occasions, using different similes, different phrases, different expressions. So this man suddenly was blindfolded, and he lost his track, and he didn't know how to get back to his home. So a kind-hearted person tells him, well, look here, you move this way. You have to take this road that will take you back to your hometown. And this unfortunate man who has lost everything because of false identification, because of blindfoldness, he slowly returns home. He starts his homebound journey. All spiritual practices are like moving towards our real home. Our real home is the Atman, the self, the supreme consciousness. That's the place where we belong to. And that's a place that belongs to us. That's our true nature. Everything else is a foreign element, is alien to our true nature. It isn't a superimposition. Now coming back to this Upanishadic parable, this teacher gives him some instruction. See, if you travel for some time, for some distance, you will come across a signpost. Then you should turn to the right, and then you will reach a junction where four freeways meet. There you have to be very careful. You have to carefully observe the signpost, or you should ask somebody which way I should turn to get back to my hometown. This is very important. Similarly, when we read the scriptures, when we listen to lectures, when we get spiritual instruction, we don't really reach the goal. That's the beginning of our spiritual pilgrimage. At every turn, there can be occasion for confusion, misunderstanding, and at that time, we must read the scriptures, the teachings of the sages who have gone through this road on innumerable occasions, on previous occasions. So, if you read the Upanishads, if you read the scriptures, it's like asking people which way to turn, because I want to take the right road that leads me to my hometown. Otherwise, if he doesn't do that, if he just walks straight away, he may reach the opposite end. So, after getting spiritual instruction in the course of spiritual life, we must read scriptures, we must discuss with people who have traveled along this road. So remember, coming back to the parable, you should know very well, the person who liberated him from the bondage, who removed his blindfold, should know, first of all, which direction, which road takes to his homeland. That means that person should have traveled through this road on innumerable occasions previously. Unless you have traveled earlier, you can't be sure that this road will take this particular destination. Some tricky fellows will come and show you the opposite direction. That's very important in spiritual life. In spiritual life, Sri Ramakrishna makes a point. Mahapurusha Samsaya means constant association with the right thinking people. Spiritual aspirants is very important. Sri Ramakrishna makes it very important clear. Much more important is avoiding people who go in the opposite direction. There may be some charlatans, People, they won't get anything out of that, but they will derive a great inner joy by showing you the opposite direction. You move in the opposite direction. They won't get anything, no reward, but inner joy. Well, I have done a little mischief. That also you have to be very careful. So in the Shankaracharya's commentary, he gives a very royal interpretation. In the sub-commentaries, like Anandagiri and others, there are other commentaries upon commentaries. They say, why is it very important that you should listen to the right person? If you listen to the wrong person, you may again get caught by the robbers. You may be moving backward to the same dangerous train and road. So, in spiritual life, after getting instruction, we have to constantly put up self-effort. Our own work, our own effort. our own self-effort. That alone can ensure us to reach the spiritual goal. This is a very famous instruction. So here you have to remember, the teacher who saves you from the bondage, who removes the blindfold, represents scriptures, teachings of saints and sages, holy associations, etc. The robbers who waylay you, who ambush you, who rob you, represent obstacles, temptations, worldliness, etc. And this road is our life. There are wild animals in the forests. They are the sensory objects which may tempt us away from the track. So, the great sage Uddalaka teaches Shvetaketu. This instruction that you get from books or holy saints and sages, you can never get yourself directly through your own rational philosophical analysis. So, the two most prominent tools in epistemology is direct perception, inference. Comparison, assumption, and verbal testimony, these are more or less related to direct perception and inference. So, direct perception and inference, pratyaksha and anumana, two important tools, epistemological tools in theory of knowledge, cannot help us which way to turn in spiritual life. It can help us very well in material life, because spiritual life is qualitatively different from everything else. In spiritual life, we cannot plan and think and be sure, we cannot determine what will be the end result. See, we can plan everything. We can plan a machine. We can plan a building very precisely, very accurately. We can be sure how a machine is going to work, how a computer is going to work, but we can never be sure how our own mind is going to function. We can never predetermine how our own mind is going to function, how our own mind is going to respond to external situations, in external conditions. In everything else, mathematical logic works. 2 plus 2 is 4. But in life, it doesn't work. Therefore, to get wisdom in spiritual life, we have to turn the teachings of the saints and sages, which according to Vedanta are scriptures. Scriptures contain the realizations of people, great saints and sages, who have traveled through this road, up and down, this road of spiritual life. Now, Sri Ramakrishna says, illustrates this point in the light of a different story that I will read, and then we will go to another very important parable. I thought parables would be a great and effective way of expounding some very profound spiritual ideas. In Sri Ramakrishna's parable, he says, this world is the wilderness. The three robbers are the three gunas, constituents of nature. Sattva guna, Rajo guna, Tamo guna. Sattva guna is related to serenity, calmness, tranquility, knowledge, light, etc. Rajo guna is related to action, dynamism, ambition, and also conflicts. Tamo guna is related to inaction, inertia, laziness, and total ignorance. The individual soul is a traveler. Self-knowledge is a treasure. Tamas binds him with the fetters of the world, but Sattva protects him from the actions of Rajas and Tamas. By taking refuge in Sattva, the Jiva becomes free from lust, anger, and delusion, which are the effects of Tamas. Thus, the Sattva quality emancipates Jiva from the bondage of the world. But the Sattva quality itself is also a robber. It leads one, however, up to the path of the Supreme Abode, and then it says, behold, there is your home. Then it disappears. When even the Sattva quality cannot give up the region of the Absolute Brahman. The idea is this. These three gunas are the three constituents of this relative world, Prakriti, this relative world in which we are living. Sattva stands closest to the absolute spiritual enlightenment, to spiritual wisdom. But when you reach the spiritual wisdom, even the sattva is transcended. Of the three gunas, sattva comes as a help, as a guide, who takes you close to your destination. The other two will not take you towards your destination. Sattva can take you close to the destination. So when you reach the destination, even the sattva is transcended. Then there is another very interesting illustration here. Sri Ramakrishna gives the illustration as a woodcutter. In fact, it is also one of the famous parables in the Gospel. A woodcutter led a very miserable life with the small means he could procure by daily selling the load of wood he brought from a neighboring forest. A poor man who managed to make both ends meet by cutting wood from the nearby forest and taking to the markets. Somehow he managed to make both ends meet. Once a sannyasi, a wise man who was traveling that way, saw this man at work. So this woodcutter was struggling hard, cutting wood, taking to the markets to make money for sustenance. This wise man advised him to proceed onward into the interior recesses of the forests, intimating to him that he would gain something thereby. Charayveti will go ahead. That's the instruction which this wise man gave him. Only this word, Charay, go ahead, 2 words. He didn't say in which direction you should go, what is going to be the benefit of going ahead. He didn't say. Just said this much, go ahead. Maybe this woodcutter did not fully understand, because his usual job was cutting wood and taking to the forest. Similarly, when we read scriptures, when we get some spiritual knowledge, sometimes we may read and we may remember for some time, but we may not take those instructions very seriously. Only on later occasions when some problems arise, some challenges, dilemmas, then suddenly our mind goes back. And suddenly we remember some ideas, some spiritual ideas that we read about. And they come as a great help. They come for a rescue. That's being illustrated here. So, at the beginning, this woodcutter did not fully understand. He may have continued cutting his wood, but then by grinding poverty, starvation, and other problems, he must have thought again and again, well, how can I make both ends meet? How can I get a little more money so that I can live more happily? That's why sometimes some blows are required for spiritual life. These blows sometimes open some inner doors. It sometimes helps us without worry, without some inexplicable problems and dilemmas. Common people will not feel the need to turn to spiritual life. If everything is alright, just think of life where everything could be predetermined, achieved without much effort. Money, wealth, education, everything. Everything goes very well. They say the suicide rates are the highest in two of the most advanced welfare-friendly nations in the world. Countries like Japan, some of the Scandinavian countries, the small nations where administration is very efficient, where they have got cradle to grave protection, education, healthcare, everything. Suicide rates are very high. Now, it means even if everything is provided in this world, we will not really be happy. Sometimes problems and dilemmas make us aware of the meaningfulness of life. When we have something to strive for, something to struggle for, some problems to encounter and solve, then life appears to be meaningful and effective. Swami Vivekananda makes a statement in the context of his exposition of yoga. He says, yoga brings out the divine in man. So in all of us, in all human beings, there is the animal and also there is a God. So yoga helps us to evolve from the human dimension to the divine dimension, from man to God. So from animal to man, man means woman also, human beings, from animal to human beings, and from the human dimension to the divine dimension. This is the function of yoga. Another context, Swamiji says, struggle is the essence of life. Making constant effort alone can give us a sense of meaningfulness for existence. Otherwise, we must have reached the highest spiritual illumination. When we reach the highest spiritual illumination, then we transcend this period of struggle. If you have not reached any spiritual advancement, if you are not evolved spiritually, at the same time, if everything is predetermined, then life itself becomes meaningless. That's why problems and worry sometimes they fill a vacuum which otherwise could lead to self-destructive tendencies. In this man's case, he was poor, and he also got the light of wisdom from the saint who told him to go ahead. He didn't listen at the beginning, but again problems, worries, that forced him to take more seriously the instruction that he received from the saint. Then the woodcutter obeyed the injunction and proceeded onward until he came to a sandalwood tree. And being much pleased, he took away with him as many sandal logs as he could carry and sold them in the markets and derived much profit. So sandalwood is much more precious, so he could get much more money and he could solve to some extent some of his domestic problems like poverty, starvation, etc. He may have continued the same way for some time. Again, he may have had some problem. Then he remembered, well, the saint did not tell me where I should stop. He just said, go ahead. So that means I should go ahead. Then he began to think within himself, why the good sannyasi, the monk, did not tell him anything about the sandal trees, but simply advised him to proceed onward into the interior of the forest. So the next day he went on even beyond the place of the sandalwood trees, and at last he came upon a copper mine. And he took with them as much copper as he could carry, and selling it in the market got much money. So he became still more happy, still richer. Now, if he had really reached the highest level of contentment, he would have stopped there. So in spiritual life also, sometimes when we pray for something, and when we feel that prayers are answered, then we stop. This could happen. Yesterday and day before yesterday I was referring to this important topic. What kinds of people pray and what's the effect of prayer? What's the psychology of prayer? We can pray, well, sometimes we can pray even for material desires, for fulfillment of material desires. Though the highest devotee won't do that. Only a spiritual seeker at the beginning of his spiritual evolution would pray for the fulfillment of material desires. Vedanta doesn't include him from the realm of spirituality. Sometimes we will read in books that we should not pray for anything other than the ultimate God realization. Sri Ramakrishna and Swamiji, all the great spiritual prophets, they insist the highest devotee will never pray for anything other than the highest spiritual enlightenment, or something related to doing his spiritual duties or responsibilities, solving problems related to spiritual life, which is the same as not praying for anything material. But there are people who pray in a state of total helplessness, artha, a sick man praying for freedom from bodily ailments, pain, or sickness, and so on. Or a poor man praying for wealth. So artha, artharthi, these are the two devotees of the lower level. The one who prays in a state of total helplessness, praying for freedom from some material problems, or for solving some problems in material life. If we go on praying for this, and when we feel that our prayers are answered, then out of a sense of obligation, gratitude to God who has answered our prayers, we may graduate to the next level of spiritual evolution. We may continue the same prayer without asking for material benefits. There is a higher evolution of spiritual life. We evolve from a state where we pray for material benefit towards a state where we do the same prayer but not for material advancement but for higher spiritual enlightenment, evolution. That's Ramanuja's interpretation. But sometimes it so happens that when we progress to some extent in spiritual life, for ordinary householders, for example, material demands, children have education, job is secure, enough to maintain, no poverty, no problem, everything. That is maybe as a result of prayer and spiritual practices. But that should not be a reason for us to stop at that point. It's like stopping when you get copper mine. But the woodcutter did not stop there. So, beyond that, we must also think of higher spiritual evolution. We were referring to Nachiketa's third prayer. The third prayer was this. Some people say, when this body disappears, there's an end of the journey. According to some other sages, there is something that continues to exist even when the body perishes. What is that reality? Please teach me this highest spiritual truth. So that's a higher goal that one should strive for. So in this parable, the parable says, so the next day he went on even beyond the place of sandalwood trees, and at last he came upon a copper mine, and he took with him as much copper as he could carry, selling it in the market, and got much money. Next day, without stopping at the copper mine, he proceeded further still, because he remembered the instruction of the wise man, who asked him just this much, go ahead. So, he moved ahead, and he came upon a silver mine and took with him as much silver as he could carry and sold it in the market and got even more money. And so daily proceeding further and further, he got at gold mines, diamond mines, and at last became exceedingly rich. Such is also the case with the man who aspires after true knowledge. Sri Ramakrishna says that if he does not stop in his progress after attaining a little of any extraordinary supernatural powers, or rather complete fulfillment of material demands and desires, if he doesn't stop and if he continues his journey, then he becomes really rich in a spiritual sense. He gets the highest spiritual benefit. That's a point which Sri Ramakrishna makes. So sometimes satisfaction at the lower level, when our material desires are fulfilled, we may feel satisfied. That satisfaction can become a stumbling block in our spiritual journey. Though it is necessary, but it represents a lower level of spiritual evolution. We must even go beyond that. That's a point which Sri Ramakrishna makes here. During the reign of Akbar, there lived a Muslim ascetic in a certain forest near Delhi, the capital of the city. Many used to resort to the cottage of this holy man, but as he had nothing with which to show hospitality to these visitors, he was in need of some money for this purpose and went for help to Akbar, the king, the emperor, who was well known for his kindness to holy men. The emperor was then saying his prayers, and the fakir sat outside listening to the emperor uttering his prayers. In the course of his prayers, the emperor was heard to say, Akbar, the emperor, "O Lord, please grant me more wealth, more power, more territories." So the emperor was immensely rich and he was asking for more wealth and more power. So at once the fakir rose up and was about to steal out of the room when the emperor asked him to come back and be seated again. At the end of the prayer, Akbar asked the fakir, "Sir, you came to see me. How is it then that you wanted to depart without saying anything to me?" The fakir said, "The object of my visit to your majesty, well, I need not trouble you with that." Well, I don't want to trouble you. Now the next point comes. When Akbar repeatedly pressed him, no, don't hesitate. Please tell me what exactly you want from me. Your Majesty, many people come to me to be taught, but for want of money, I am unable to see to their comforts and needs. So I thought it well to come to Your Majesty for help. Akbar then asked why he was about to go away without having told him the object of his visit. The fakir replied, "When I saw that you were yourself a beggar, begging of the Lord for fortune and power and territory, I said to myself, why should I go for begging to a person who is himself a beggar? I had better beg of the Lord himself, if indeed it is not possible for me to do so without begging altogether. So if I want to beg, why can't I beg the Lord himself?" So the idea is this. While praying to God for the material plane, even while asking for the fulfillment of needs in secular material life, daily life, we must remember no amount of fulfillment of material desires. The fulfillment of material desires can never really make us fully contented and happy. That happiness, that contentment will be short-lived. The real contentment comes when we feel that we have got something beyond which there is nothing to be striven for, nothing to be asked for. That's a real contentment. All other forms of contentment are short-lived. They are only one side of the coin. The other side is discontentment. What you get, you may lose. So when you get, you become happy. When you lose that, you become unhappy. They are the two sides of the same coin. But there is one satisfaction. It's not really satisfaction, but the supreme spiritual contentment that comes when we reach the highest spiritual illumination. That is the message of this story. This could happen to anybody. A new beginning in spiritual life could happen even to the most unlikely type of people. Suddenly, there could be a new opening. Sri Ramakrishna refers to this phenomenon. He explains this with the help of an example. Suppose you go on digging a well, looking for water. For a long time you have been digging, you won't get water. Suddenly you hit a stone and a spring opens up. Immediately, within hours, the whole well may get filled up with pure water. Similarly, whatever may be our present state of spiritual ignorance, this spiritual darkness can be removed at one stroke if there is the light of spiritual wisdom. Because the light doesn't take a long time in driving away darkness. When light comes, darkness immediately vanishes. Sometimes this sudden opening of a spring could happen even to the most unexpected, unlikely types of people. There is a famous story of Valmiki. Valmiki is supposed to be the first poet of Sanskrit language, Sanskrit tradition. His famous classic is Ramayana, the story of Rama. In fact, he was a robber whose job was going about robbing people, killing them. That was his job. So one day it so happened that he saw a group of old men approaching the place where he was hiding. When they reached him, he threatened them and he was able to rob them, maybe he may even kill them. That was his job, that was his habit. One of the saints asked him, please wait a minute, and asked him about his family background, his parents, his wife, children, and so on. And this robber explained, his name was Ratnakara. That was the name of that robber, who later became Valmiki. So, in fact, the name itself means it is the storehouse of diamonds. That's the meaning. He was a great spiritual man in his previous life, but somehow he had forgotten and he took to this heinous profession of robbery. So this saint asked him, well, you need not worry, we don't have much to give you, but we can give you happily whatever we have. Don't take the trouble to use force. But before you do that, I want to ask you a few questions. For whom are you indulging in these criminal activities, sinful activities, robbing people, killing people? He said, well, he has his family, his parents, children, he has to support them. All right. Do you know that what you are doing is a sinful, a criminal deed, and you may have to suffer for this. You may go to hell, you may have to suffer for all the sinful deeds that you are committing. Do you know that? He said, yes. And do you think that your wife, your children, your relations, for whom you are doing all this to support these people, are they going to share in the consequences, share the consequences of these sinful deeds? But the story doesn't say what reply he gave. Most probably he was foolish enough to give the reply that I'm sure they are going to share the consequences of all my evil actions. The saying must have caught him at that point. All right, now go and ask them, and we will remain here till you return. So this robber went to his home and asked his wife, children and other relations, look here, you know what is my job, how I am supporting you. They possibly thought he had a respectable profession. Then he told them, well, he said all about his work. He told them he was a robber. He robs people, kills them, takes away their wealth, and uses that wealth to support them. They were horrified. But then said, so I'm sure you are going to share the consequences of my sinful deeds. They said, no, you fellow, you get out. His parents were about to drive him out. And his wife may have gone for divorce, because at that time, at least, she said as much, you fellow, I'm not going to share the consequences of your evil actions. And his children also almost disowned him. That brought him to his senses. So this man came back to the place where the sages were waiting for him and told them, well, now I understand the true nature of my sinful deeds. He said that his wife and children and relations were not going to share the consequences of the evil deeds, crimes that he was committing. And he fell at their feet. And the saint gave him some spiritual instruction and asked him to repeat the name of Rama, the name of God. But he was such an evil man that he could not bring himself to utter that name. So he was asked to utter Ma and then Ra. If you repeat that, then it becomes Rama. So, and they asked him, you sit here, you keep repeating this holy name. Don't think of anything else. Forget the past. You need not worry about what this word means. You sincerely go on repeating this word, Rama, and then we will return after some time, after some years. Till then, you should keep repeating this word. They returned after several years. They didn't see him, instead they found a huge ant hill. And then there were two halls for him to see things outside, maybe to breathe, to get some oxygen. This robber was sitting inside the ant hill, was repeating this holy name. He had forgotten about himself, his surroundings, everything. He was fully absorbed, immersed in meditating on this holy name, Rama. And then they just removed the anthill and they found this man had become a saint. And he is the author of the first important classic, the first work in Sanskrit language, literary work. Literary work, because Vedic literature preceded that much by many millennia, but this was the first important classical work in Sanskrit language called Ramayana, the story of Rama. So this man became a great saint. And how he happened to write this classical book? So you can see the transformation of a robber into a great saint. So he did not ask, what's the meaning of this word? What guarantee is there that this, by repetition of this word, I will get spiritual illumination? If you have doubted a little, you will be able to sit for 1 hour. A complete faith. And he identified himself with the essence of the holy name, and he himself became a great saint and the chronicler of the story of Rama. She became a well-known saint, and one day he was traveling, and then he saw two birds playing together on the top branch of a tree. And he saw a hunter at a distance shooting an arrow to one of the birds. And the arrow struck one of the birds, it fell down. Then suddenly he felt so much of pain. The robber, whose profession was robbing and killing people, now felt terrible pain when he saw a small bird was shot by an arrow by a hunter. And then spontaneously these words come out of his mouth. Manishada padishtamstam agamas shashwati samaha yat kraunja midhuna degam avadihi kamamohitam. Avadihi kamamohitam. The meaning is this: O hunter, you who have shot down one of these birds which are playing, you will never have peace of mind. You will never attain peace. And this Valmiki later wrote down the great story of Rama. So you can see this. Sometimes accidental situations, dilemmas, very serious confrontations with unpleasant, unhappy realities of life can open our inner eyes and help us to start a new life. But Vedanta says that this person must have practiced spiritual sadhanas, he must have done spiritual practices in his previous life, and he has a lot of accumulated spiritual tendencies and impressions within. So a sudden, shocking, rather a shameful episode, like suddenly becoming aware of his total helplessness, the realization that he alone will have to share the whole responsibility of the evil consequences of his evil actions. That gave him a shock, and that shock pushed away all other tendencies. Sometimes a shocking experience can take you to spiritual life. It's like a lake which has many layers of tendencies and impressions. Suddenly, the lake may get cleared up. So, of course, we will have just 5 minutes more. So the story tells many interesting spiritual aspects of practical spiritual life. First one, we must be very careful as to what we are doing. In spiritual life, it is very important to remember that we are all living in solitude. A person may have thousands of followers, important family connections, a lot of political influence, many flatterers around. Sri Ramakrishna refers to that, the problem of being surrounded by flatterers. In the Gospel it comes, he directly addresses some of the prominent people in the city. So don't be surrounded by sycophants and flatterers. So we may have all types of associations, friends and flatterers. But in spiritual life, it is always important to remember that we are actually lonely travelers. We are traveling alone. A pilgrimage becomes a pilgrimage only when we are traveling alone. If we are traveling the company of a huge, big group, and then with all arrangements perfectly made, all precisely organized beforehand, all booking of hotels, flight tickets, everything ready. If you make a travel, it becomes a picnic. Real pilgrimage is meaningful and effective only when we undertake in solitude. So it's because life itself is a movement, a journey in solitude. So this robber suddenly realized that he was alone in this world. Before that, before he confronted these saints and sages, he was thinking that all these friends, all these associations for whom he was working. But a sudden realization that this life is but just one episode. All these relations come and go. We are actually lonely travelers on this track of life. This is illustrated in the light of a well-known story in the spiritual classic of Bhagavata Purana. After that I shall conclude. How this important, spiritually very relevant idea of solitude in life, because we are all living in solitude, spiritually speaking. It is illustrated in the context of rebirth in this story. A king had a son, and when the son was fit to be the next heir apparent, he was bold, he was well educated, well behaved, loved by the subjects of the country. When he reached his mature age of 21, he died. That's the story. The king and the queen became very much upset, naturally, because they didn't have any other son. So the kingdom may go without a ruler if the king dies in old age. So they were all weeping and crying. All the subjects, all the members of the royal family were weeping and crying. Then the great sage Narada happened to appear there, come there as a visitor. He used to visit palaces, kings, emperors, and also common people more frequently to help them by his spiritual instructions. So Narada asked him why they were weeping and crying. So they told him that the only son had just died and the dead body was lying there. It was ready for cremation, to be taken to the cremation ground. Then Narada told him, look here, death is unavoidable. If not today, tomorrow. This human life, this boy's life as your son, is one of the several lives that he had gone through. In the previous life, you are not his parents. In the next life, you will not be his parents. In this life, you happen to be his parents. So why should you worry? You also will be born in some other families, in some other settings. So your relationship with this young son of yours is only a very accidental, it's a momentary phenomenon. It is not a permanent affair. So you need not worry. He tried to expound high philosophy, but they didn't understand. Because they were parents, they were worried. They were crying and weeping. Then he said, well, I will show you. And he, by his spiritual powers, he brought back this life. His son, he brought back this son back to life. He brought him back to life. So the prince was brought back to life. He got up as if waking up from sleep. Then the sage Narada told the prince, look here, you look around, see your relations, your parents are crying and weeping. You try to console them because they are so much upset. And the boy looked around. Whom are you talking about? Your own parents, the king and the queen, are sitting before you crying and weeping. Don't you recognize them? Whom? I don't recognize them. Then he said, but I had so many parents in the past. Hundreds and hundreds of pairs of parents. I don't recognize them as my parents. This actually brought them to their senses. It is not a painful truth, it's a real philosophical truth. Not that you should upset us. But the point is, in times of worry, in times of dilemmas, and also in times of spiritual problems, temptations, we should always remember that life as a spiritual seeker is the life of a solitary wanderer. And it is a life of a solitary pilgrim. It is not a picnic, it is a pilgrimage. And pilgrimage in solitude. It begins at solitude moves through solitude, it ends in solitude. That is spiritual truth. So with this we'll conclude today. We'll have interaction, and after that we'll continue tomorrow.
Swami, most of your stories are about spiritual seeker and a guide comes along. Now my question is, do you need to have a guru, or can you make your journey by taking help from many spiritual men?
For ordinary spiritual seekers, a guru is a necessity, but it is not an absolute principle. You find many spiritual personalities in the world, like Ramana Maharshi, for whom the death of his father was the beginning of a new chapter in his life. He left his home, went to a mountain cave near a temple, Arunachala, and there he started meditating. He got illumination. But there again we have to explain that he must have had a guru in his previous life, have done a lot of spiritual practices, his mind was ready. So that's why suddenly the death of his father became the cause of his spiritual reawakening. But that doesn't happen to everyone. So that's why it is said it's not an absolute principle. But for all ordinary spiritual seekers, a teacher is necessary.
Well, if, say your guru dies and your life is, your spiritual life is just beginning, won't these other holy men that you meet help you on your path?
Yes, if you have strong faith that instructions of our guru, then all associations indirectly become helpful. Indirectly, whatever you read, whatever you hear from holy persons, help you to reinforce, to enrich the instructions that you already received. They confirm the teachings that you already received. That's the idea. That's why all great teachers have got one very important characteristic. They are always positive, never negative. The statement of Jesus, I come to fulfill, not to destroy. This is a very important point. It's a universal spiritual truth. Not only a prophetic fact, but it's a spiritual truth. So, once we have a strong faith in the instructions we receive from our teacher, then whatever we hear, we read about, will help us, will come as will enrich and reinforce our convictions, will not create a conflict. That's the idea. Sri Ramakrishna says at one point, your own mind becomes your guru. At one point. So if you travel for some distance, mind itself automatically shows you which way to turn. And when you are away from the track, mind will give you a red signal. Our inner mind develops this faculty. This could happen through some accidents, it could happen incidentally by reading, listening. Then also suddenly we get the flashing conviction, well, this is not right way. That's why Sri Ramakrishna stresses these 2 points. Keeping company with people who help you in your spiritual life, and keeping far away from people who take you away from the track. Keeping away from the track of the robbers and keeping close the track through which wise men travel up and down. You know that simile, that Chandogya Upanishad story? It is a very famous illustration. It is sometimes called Acharya Upadesha, meaning the importance of instruction of a teacher in spiritual life, because a teacher suddenly helps you to open your eyes. It's a reawakening. When we are in a state of dormant sleep, suddenly we have the effect of opening our eyes and see where we are. Anadi Maya Supta Yatha Jiva Prabuddhide. Famous verse is there in the Mandrikakarya Gaudapada, who wrote the 6th century. We are all in a state of spiritual sleep. A teacher suddenly helps you to get up and open your eyes. Then we realize we have been sleeping. We realize we have been sleeping only when we get out of the state of sleep. When we are awakened, we realize we have been in a state of sleep, not the state of sleep. When we are sleeping, we don't realize we are sleeping. That's the idea behind. Vedantaji has no important point to discuss.
Swami, you mentioned that to identify the essence, like you made that story that you gave, how the thief actually just had to repeat the name, but he didn't. He had full faith in the instruction.
While speaking.
Yeah, and then he just kept repeating the name of mantra. But here's my question: how can you identify the essence of the mantra or whatever the name without actually knowing the meaning? Because we always been taught to.
Yes.
And then you
Yes.
said that later on we found he was found
Yes.
in a state. So obviously he would. He should have known the meaning. He didn't know the meaning behind it, but. My question basically is, how do you identify the essence without really knowing the meaning behind it?
Yes. Coming to Valmiki, this robber, he was indulging in all these criminal activities, fully convinced that he was doing his duty and his identification with his family, wife, children, and all of that. In fact, so he was very happy about that. When he suddenly realized that he was indulging in these terrible activities and he would be alone in sharing the consequences of his evil actions, that shock, that terrible shock, purified his mind. A shocking episode will have the effect of pushing aside, pushing out, removing all other tendencies, and mind becomes well focused to spiritual life. So that's why that sometimes we find in the case of many great saints, sudden shocking episodes will have a transformative effect in their life. It doesn't happen. If it happens casually, it doesn't happen. If this man suppose he had stopped his criminal activities and gradually he had started reading books or reading, this would not happen. His conviction, his identification with his own criminal activities, and a sudden realization that he will be the only person who will be sharing the consequences, the undesirable consequences, going to hell and such things. That shocked him. It may not shock everyone. Hardened criminals doesn't happen. But in the case of this man, he must have practiced, he must have done a lot of spiritual practices in previous life. So it came to the surface. You can see in Sri Ramakrishna's life, when Totapuri instructed him the Mahavakya, the ultimate spiritual truth, it suddenly became an experience to him. Totapuri himself took long years to reach this level. But for Sri Ramakrishna, it was a momentary flash. Suppose we are familiar with a route, with a place, and somebody tells something about that place. Immediately, we'll be able to visualize in our mind the place because we know that place. Sri Ramakrishna had already reached the highest state of spiritual experience. So Tottapuri's instruction immediately took him to the experience level to the highest experience level. Otherwise, for ordinary spiritual seekers, they should listen, they should meditate on the meaning of the mantra, and gradually they will reach the experience level. There are two schools of philosophy in Vedanta. One is Prasankhyanavada, the other is Shabda Aparokshvada. These are the two different schools which expound the effect of listening to Mahavakyas, spiritual instructions. One school is the one I already explained. If a person has reached a very high level of spiritual fitness, the highest and most sublime level of mental purity, even if you listen once, that will be enough for you. But for those whose minds are not ready for the highest truth, they will have to listen, they have to contemplate on meaning, frequently they have to read, enrich, and gradually they may get a flash of that experience. There are many people it never happens. That also is there. But these two schools are very prominent in Vedanta. One is Prasankhyanavada, which Prasankhyanam means Dhyanabhyasa, constant meditation, contemplation on the meaning of spiritual instructions. This school belongs to Mandana and others. The other one is Shabda Parokshvada, which means the moment you hear the Mahavakya, immediately the experience, the real mystical experience associated with that instruction becomes real for you, becomes a fact of experience for you. That's the idea behind it. It depends upon where we stand. So there are people on whom just reading or listening or getting instruction or even initiation may not have any effect right now, but after some births, after some lives, it will have some effect. And then go on evolving. That's all. So, see, in schools you may have seen, those who are school teachers, when you teach a lesson, a new lesson for example, if you give a lesson, suddenly you find some students will be staring at you with open eyes. So there are a few teachers here who will share this. They will open eyes, they will be listening to you. Which means they are fully understanding, appreciating what you say. There will be a few fellows who may not care much. They won't even listening to you. There are some who may be listening but not able to fully understand. But there are a few, even if you are teaching higher mathematics, trigonometry, even metaphysics, some facts, there are some students, suddenly they forget everything, they will be staring at you. Am I right? Why does it happen? What we are teaching suddenly becomes obvious to them. Which means either they may be getting tuition, special tuition. Parents may be teaching. Higher metaphysical spiritual truths, they may have had this acquaintance in previous life. So you have to analyze the whole thing from a broad spectrum. This is true even in university classes. There are some fellows, they won't care. Even if you're talking about very obvious facts of life, nothing happens. There are some, they understand it's a fact, but it's not very obvious to them. They will listen to you with great attention. There are others who just stare at you and there will be a special light on their eyes. Am I right? Exactly. This is what happens. So that shows this is true in spiritual life also. Those who are highly qualified, when they hear once, it becomes a matter of experience. So Sri Ramakrishna's case is a classic example. For Sri Ramakrishna, when Tottapuri gave the instruction, immediately it became not words but fact of experience. It is said about Shankaracharya, Govinda Bhagavapada, 30 minutes it became matter of experience. So this school, there is no contradiction between these two schools. According to one school, After listening to instruction, you need to meditate on the meaning of the instruction, and then you have to reinforce. You have to develop a conviction with the help of books, holy company, listening to others. Constantly, it becomes a real conviction, and gradually, maybe not in this life, next life, it becomes an experience. For others, it becomes an experience just on one listening. So, according to Prasankhyanavada school, you need to practice sadhana chatushtaya, the 4 fundamental disciplines, to fully understand the meaning of the Mahavakya. For others, they already reached this stage. Sadhana chatushtaya is natural for them, the basic qualifications for fitness in spiritual life. For them, immediately becomes a matter of experience. That's why great prophets and teachers had got so few real disciples. So few. Sri Ramakrishna Hazra was living next door to him. And Swami Vivekananda had to travel all the way from another part of the city. Hazra didn't realize the meaning of Sri Ramakrishna's instructions the way Swami Vivekananda realized. You see? So that's it. I think we have just about 10 minutes more.
Swami, if you have to travel alone, and that's the basic idea, what is the need for a guru?
Yes. Well, we are traveling alone, but we should know which track to follow, which road to follow. We should also learn how to read the traffic signs. And when we reach a junction with 4 roads meeting, we should know which road to take. These instructions are coming from the Guru teacher. Then we can undertake. The idea of pilgrimage should be planted in our mind. That's the function of the teacher, the Guru.
Swami, how does one hold on to the inner solitude in the midst of life's activities and storms?
Sri Ramakrishna says, we have to keep the spiritual idea, the jnana, the spiritual knowledge, somewhere in a corner, and then live in this world. It should be kept within our mind, and then function in this world. Whenever there is a problem, we can refer to this, help us to be on the track. That's what Sri Ramakrishna says. So he tells some visitors, you should go to solitude, the solitude of your own mind, or in a physically solitary place, in your own room, or the company of spiritual seekers, holy company. All these are various ways of remembering this truth while being engaged in our secular duties and responsibilities. For that we have to constantly keep in touch with these ideas. Sometimes it may take a few shocks, a few blows, and immediately, instead of getting sweat off our feet, becoming depressed, we can refer to this. Actually, we are solitary travelers in spiritual life.
Is it also an incentive to move away from things that...
Physically, we cannot and we should not move away from duties and responsibilities.
But if you find that certain areas really aren't conducive to your growth, and this thing comes up, could that also be a guide to readjust what you're doing with your life?
In fact, sometimes if we physically move away from our duties and responsibilities, then it could even create problems unless we have reached that state. So, Sri Ramakrishna's instruction to the spiritual seekers in general is they should keep doing their duties, performing the responsibilities, At the same time, keeping in mind God is the only friend. He gives a number of illustrations. A maid servant employed in rich man's home. You have to remember the socio-cultural context. That should may not be even comprehensible in the context of modern America social life. But remember the old feudal system, feudal social setup. A maid servant may be employed in rich man's home. So she has to look after the children of the rich person. And she has to pretend to be an affectionate mother to all these children. And she may talk like that, may behave like that. But at the same time, she may lose her job, she may be dismissed any time. And she knows that her own child is living far away in a small hut. That child is her only child, really speaking. These are all rich men's children. They don't belong to her. But she can't show that, otherwise she will lose her job. So she has to look after them with great affection and love. So like that, we have to live in this world. At the same time, we have to remember the real friend is somewhere else. That's God alone. He's our true friend. God is only true friend. God is the only one to whom we belong. He's the only one who belongs to us. So this should be kept in mind. It can sometimes be used as an antidote when you confront problems. We need not be shocked. This is the nature of the world. It's a rich man's home. These children don't belong to you. That should be kept in mind. So, this world may present many problems. In those situations, we can remember this, that God is the only real friend.
Shouldn't we also, though, be careful of what we call duties and responsibilities? Perhaps we're going the wrong way with our interpretation of what our duty and responsibilities are.
Well, you mean you should get completely identified with the children whom you are looking after as a paid?
Well, or take these woodcutters and robbers and these people, maybe they thought it was their duty and responsibility, and they found out it really wasn't. So rather than trying to find inner solitude amidst doing something that is not right, that place of upheaval could be a place to realign.
But Sri Ramakrishna gives these parables to meet the problems of spiritual seekers from different domestic, social and cultural settings. The woodcutter's example is shown to demonstrate the importance of tenacity, perseverance, strong will. And the illustration which I gave just now is given to illustrate the fact that God is the only our true friend. The robber's example is again easy. That person had strong faith in what the saints taught him, and he became a saint himself. But that happened because he had a terrible shock in his life. But terrible shocks do not always transform people. So the explanation is he had done spiritual practices in previous life. That was in the background. The shocking truth brought it out. So all these parables are given to meet the requirements of people belonging to different cultural, social and family settings. The one which I gave just now is common. God is only true friend. In fact, if we can keep that in mind, then it becomes a real fact. Second point to remember, as I said earlier, see, in spiritual life, and this is a very important point that Sri Ramakrishna emphasizes again and again in the Gospel. Reasoning and argument and analysis cannot take us 1 inch forward. In fact, Sri Ramakrishna knew a few English words. One of them was thank you. And this he used in a very interesting context. Most probably Young said in one context, that means too much of rational analysis, arguments, etc. is not good. Something like that Young said. Sri Ramakrishna was overjoyed and said thank you. Now the point is, in spiritual life there is a very interesting principle. Once you actually enter the path, then many of the doubts that confronted us before we entered spiritual path really fade away, disappear. Not before. In secular life, we have to plan, we have to be precise, we can plan everything in detail. But in spiritual life, we can never really enter spiritual life before, after our doubts are cleared. Because our doubts never disappear until we enter spiritual life, practical spiritual life, and move some distance. Then these doubts suddenly start vanishing. So, it's like, that's why in one context Sri Ramakrishna says, somehow you should enter the river, the pond. Somebody may push you into the river, or you enter the river to take bath. Whatever may be the way, you should enter the river. We should never sit on the bank and go on analyzing, because that will not take us 1 inch forward. That's the main difference between spiritual life and all other life situations. We should, doubts will vanish only when we enter the path. And suddenly you find it is known to every spiritual seeker. Once we really start doing spiritual practices, many of these doubts will vanish. We may have to confront difficulties in our everyday workplaces, that's true. But inner conflicts and doubts will vanish. External problems we have to encounter, but we slowly develop the proper wisdom to confront external problems once we start entering practical part of spiritual life. So we will continue the discussion maybe tomorrow. Om Tava Kathamritam Tapta Jivanam Kavibhirididam Kalmashapaham Sravanamangalam Simata Tatam Bhuvi Grinanti Bhurida Janah.